Hi, everyone. My name is Grady Diaz, and welcome to Fiba's Monday special webinar, which is open for all who would like to take a deeper dive into the world of basketball officiating. Our goal is to bring interesting individuals from different organizations and from all areas of the game, such as players, coaches, and officials, who can share their insight with all of you. Today's webinar focus will be simple steps to better calls and will be presented by Mike Thompson. Our guidelines are that we ask that you write and submit via Q&A box any question you might have throughout the webinar. Now I'll give the floor to FIBA Head of Refereeing, Carl Unibrandt.
Thank you, Grady. Welcome everybody to this month webinar. We were just thinking that it's a good idea to have some of the principles that we are using in FIBA for the refereeing. And we actually go back to the basics, more or less. You know, when we're talking about the top refereeing, it's not about how good is your top. It's about how high is your bottom, basically. Meaning that day in, day out, you are able to performance in kind of the high level. And I would say that all the protocols, all the kind of the practical principles that we are using will guide you and will push you to having the good basic level for the refereeing. And this is what we were thinking today, that we would like to share you, remind some of you about the principles that we have, and we're not going for the what we call the gray areas 50-50. We try to more stay focused on the obvious things that what we should be able to cover during the game. And I'm really pleased to have a Mike with us today. Mike, who's been around for a while and seeing a lot of things. Mike is also the person who is working closely with our rule advisory group and also creating the new concepts for us. So thank you, Mike, for today. And also I would like to thank Petri, Armando, Juanito, and Rachel, who were on the backstage and put this program again together for us.
So today we will be joined by Mike Thompson. Mike has been a FIBA referee instructor since 2015 and has enjoyed an opportunity to work with FIBA officials from all around the world at tournaments, camps, and during webinars. Mike is a member of FIBA's Rule Advisory Group, contributing to the development of rules, proposals, and interpretations. At home in Vancouver, Mike is a supervisor of officials for the Canada West Universities Conference, the largest conference in Canada with a staff of 121 referees. Mike officiated domestically in Canada for 41 seasons and internationally as a FIBA referee from 1989 to 2008. His passion is helping young officials to grow and improve their game. Mike, thank you so much for being here with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Grady, and thank you, Carl, and thank you to everybody in the background. As Carl said, our title of our webinar today, Simple Steps to Better Calls, is really about talking about the structure behind our refereeing, the foundation, getting back to basics. Nothing overly fancy. We've got a simple PowerPoint, just kind of 7 slides, and a few videos to walk through. You know, I've been kind of chuckling to myself when Carl asked about this topic, and we call this the Monday special webinars. And I think in a lot of ways we should just call this the Monday webinar. And I don't say that to be trite. I say it to because this is really what we're going to do today, is just look at some very simple concepts. And the first one we're going to look at is game control. And we all know that FIBA's #1 mantra is game control. We use it all the time. But really, what does that mean? And how do we achieve it? And so the 4 bullets in front of you help us explain what we're looking for out of game control. And much like I said with game control, what does it mean? We talk all the time about common sense, but we never really define common sense. So what is common sense? Well, common sense is the ability to think and behave in a reasonable way and make good decisions. We look for referees that have that common sense. We look for referees that will be proactive, those that take actions by causing change and not only reacting to change when it happens. It's important as a referee to have those two skills of common sense and proactivity. So when you see a problem, you address it. And then when you see a problem, make sure you follow up. Close the loop, close the decision. Make sure everyone understands what has happened and why you've taken the action that it is. And all of that comes with this mentality, an attitude of being in charge with integrity. And again, we sometimes need to take that moment to go back to the basics and say, so what does that mean? Well, really, this is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. So playing in that space where we treat people with fairness, we treat people with equality, and we work from a basic set of principles and guidelines that support our decision-making. And those, of course, are provided to us in a number of ways. FIBA provides information in the OBR, the official basketball rules, the interpretations, the OBRI, the official basketball rules interpretations, and a number of excellent manuals, whether it's the IoT manuals, the terminology manuals, the 3PO basics, the 3PO advanced. FIBA over the last half dozen years or so has produced all sorts of information that allows us, if we know our books, we know that information, to apply common sense, proactivity, an ability to close the situation and be in charge with an integrity. So that allows game control to be our priority. We talk all the time about communication. The best officials are good communicators. We all need to know how to communicate. We need to improve our communication with coaches, with players, and with others. How do we do that? We do full seminars on communication and get all sorts of wonderful skills and tips. But let's go back to the basics. Communication starts with listening. There's no one on this webinar that hasn't heard that listening comes first. But do you apply that to your refereeing? We say in real estate, it's all about location, location, location. Communication in refereeing is all about listening, listening, listening. And I'm going to suggest that we don't just listen with our ears, but we listen with our ears, we listen with our eyes, and we listen with our stomach, where that intuition comes from. When we have some information and it's necessary, and we need to respond with meaning. Respond in a way that is logical, that fits what it is we're communicating with. Don't respond with situations that don't fit, are about another topic, or just are not within that framework of what the discussion is. So we listen, 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 and then we respond with meaning. We talk about tone of voice. I don't think we can understate this. It's very interesting when our heart rate is up, when our emotions are up, it's sometimes difficult to control that tone of voice. And there's many people that participate in sports and athletics. Coaches can get very emotional. Players can get emotional. And their tone of voice may not be ideally suited for a conversation in a restaurant or sitting around in a room after a session. Yet, we have to take a higher ground. Our tone of voice must always remain calm, cool, collective. Very deliberate, controlled, tactful responses. We always need to bring the temperature down during any communication that has conflict in it. And we do that by how we respond. Our words are important, but they're not the critical aspect. It's our tone of voice that is critical. And we need to be sharp, clear, and decisive. Maybe when we say sharp, clear, and decisive, we're actually using 3 words, and maybe we should just have the word simple. We don't need to spend time like the old fable of Chicken Little running around screaming that the sky is falling. It's just very sharp, clear, decisive, to the point, key words, key principles, move on. And our communication needs to be guiding. When we say guiding, it's to influence. We're influencing to a particular end. We're not demanding, we're not aggressive. This is not a battle. This is not a war that we're trying to win. This is merely presenting the idea, presenting the information, and moving on. Let's have a look at video 1, where we have a good example of an official that maintains their emotions and does a great job on all of the things we've talked about. Listen, 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 respond with meaning, guide, influence to a particular end.
To run, pursuit in transition. Foul on the play. Diab had to foul. He had no way of stopping the penetration by Severini. He'll go to the free throw line. He had no. I'm sure that's what Coach Prosecco's saying. Is that a genuine attempt to play the basketball? And because of the reaction,
so in the video, we see a great example of a referee that applies these basic principles to communication, where he listens respectfully, he's completely under control. The coach is animated, but there's no need to respond with animation. This play is not about, was the call right, were the decisions right? This is the fact that this referee has done a very good job of communicating, has done a very good job of adding game control to the game. So we're actually going to look at some particular play situations, common play situations in the game, and try and apply the type of principles we've been talking about. We're not doing a rule session. We're not actually doing a session on context and criteria. We're just trying to provide some very structural, foundational, basic principles that allow you to be a better referee and work on those basics. So when we talk about the block charge play, what are our keys? Well, it was said earlier that I'm privileged to be a member of the Fiba RAG, the Rules Advisory Group. And one of the things that I really like about the Fiba rules is they're very principle-based, and every decision that we need to make has criteria that fits in. And with a block charge, we know that the first thing we always look for is, does the defender have legal guarding position? Can we all recite the meaning of legal guarding position? 2 feet on the floor facing initially. Is that something that is muscle memory for you? Is that rote? And of course, that's all before the shooter or the offensive player has left the floor, is airborne, but 2 feet on the floor facing initially. In recent years, we've added the no charge circle to the game, which has complicated our decision-making. But as a group of referees, we're getting better at it. But between legal guarding position and the no charge circle, it gives us our rules, our principles, our basics. And then the next 3 pieces, our level of contact, that first action, and benchmarking, go a long way towards game control. If we have a block charge or a play, we must determine, is that level of contact sufficient enough to call a foul? But we need to get the first block charge in the game, and we need to get the first block charge correct. If we have collisions and bodies on the floor and we are not making decisions, we will lose control of the game very quickly. So we need to set a tone the first time we have a block charge. We need to make the call and we need to get it correct. Now, we do have plays that can be incredibly close, a play that we'll call a 50-50 play. And that first whistle on a block charge benchmarks for us in the game how we're going to adjudicate those situations tonight. So if we have a charge on a particular play, on a 50-50 play, we have a charge on 50-50 plays for the rest of the game. Clearly, our goal is to get it right at all times, so we don't support an incorrect call with another incorrect call. But once we establish the criteria in that game, we maintain it from the beginning to the end. That helps with what everybody looks for, every coach seeks in a game, is consistency. We always talk about this concept, and we've done complete webinars on seeing the whole play. The ability to process the play, start, develop, finish. We use our criteria of learning to slow the mind down, to breathe. We need to buck the trend of technology to faster decisions, see the entire play before making the decision. And in every tournament, we emphasize verbal support. If we have a block charge play and we have a whistle and we immediately have verbal support indicating color, number, and consequence, we have the game exactly where we want it, under control. Let's have a look at a couple of videos of block charge plays, one correct call and one incorrect call, and have a look at the referees using these principles.
Now it's back to a 2-point ball game. What a thriller we have. Yakov. Again, an offensive foul. Oh, just when Israel, there's a penetration, tried to go for the spectacular no-look dime, finding Blyza. Hesselich does a great job of taking the charge.
So in this play, and I'll talk over it, let her run, Petri. I think I can talk over it. We see an excellent example of the lead referee identifying that the blue player has legal guarding position 2 feet on the floor prior to the offensive player being airborne. We see it here. We identify that the player is actually outside the no charge circle. They get knocked back into the no charge circle by the contact, but they're outside that no charge circle, and the referee does a nice job of seeing the whole play. I would have liked to have seen the referee stay on the spot longer and use verbal support at that point before starting to walk away. Let's go to the next video. And on this example, see if you see legal guarding position before the contact.
Every time Germany makes a big play, so does Finland, and that is what we have seen all game long. Oh, nice pass, but it's going to be an offensive foul, I think. Over. Every time Germany makes a big play,
So let's watch on the replay. Our defensive player,
oh, nice pass,
you can see our defensive player does not actually have legal guarding position 2 feet on the floor facing prior to the offensive player being airborne. On this play, the offensive player has left the ground right here, and we do not have this defender with 2 feet on the floor facing. You can see that he gets that position after the play is airborne. Certainly a very close call, but this is a defensive foul. Again, our presentation today is not about right and wrong. Our presentation is about these very structural, foundational basics for the block charge. Legal guarding position, no charge circle, identify the level of contact, plays that we must have a whistle on. Both of these plays require a whistle. Ideally, we'd like to be correct, but they both require a whistle. We had the whistle. We just didn't use our principles on the second play. Let's move forward and talk about hand checking. If there's a situation that we could call an irritant in the game, it is this concept of hand checking or hands-on. The video that we're actually going to see is the picture that you see on the right. Have a look while I'm talking at that picture on the right. What do you see? Well, I see an obvious play. And with hand checking, we need to address the obvious plays as we do with everything. But with hand checking, we need to address the obvious plays that everybody else can see. And we have a number of tools to do that. We have the rules that guide us, but we also have the practical actions of the game. We talk about verbal support. Well, that verbal support also includes during a live ball. We need to prevent, but we need to take action. So we need to encourage, hands off, no hands. We use preventative officiating. During the live ball, we use those words. We encourage you to do so. However, you can't be in a position of crying wolf, of chicken little. You can't do it from the start of the game for the entire 40 minutes. Perhaps the first trip up the floor, hands off. Perhaps the first trip up the floor in the second half, hands off. But it's not continual. If the players do not change and adjust, that's why you have the whistle, is to take the action and address the plays. We also have to understand the difference between a situation where players are moving and players are stationary. Certainly, we will allow a player to measure, to use one hand to find where their opponent is, but that hand must come off. It cannot remain there. We look for hand checking. Does it disturb the rhythm, speed, balance, and quickness of the offense, RSBQ? If it does, we have an illegal contact that has a consequence and rises to a foul. Two hands on an opponent with the ball, an opponent attempting to make a basketball play, it's a foul. We need not think. This is basic. We don't allow this situation that you can see in the picture that the player places two hands on. It's illegal. It creates an advantage. It creates a contact. It creates a consequence, and we need to address it. We look for this action versus reaction. Make sure we understand who creates the contact. Think about this as our cylinder principle that we've emphasized for the last couple of years. Think about our timing. Again, we process the whole play. We look for cadence. We need a cadence whistle on a number of these hand checks where you try and allow the situation to end. Maybe you've prevented or officiated. You've said hands off. They haven't come off. So now you have a cadence whistle and call the foul. And again, verbal support. Communicate with people. Let's have a look at our video of this whole play. And can you see opportunities for the referee to address an obvious play, to prevent on this play? Do you recognize the two hands on?
Pazzo moves it on to Brasino. Deflected away, will stay with.
And Petri, we'll try and stop at about the point of the picture that was on the screen. So somewhere here. So on this play, the referee has an open angle. They're looking at this play, but they don't take action. They haven't taken the opportunity to prevent. We're pretty early in this game. Yes, we're 5 minutes and 44 seconds in, but we don't have a lot of scoring in the game. It's early. If we allow this play at this point and we don't address it, we have a risk. And our risk is that this game either gets too physical or we encourage this type of hand checking. This is a foul, and we either try and prevent it, but we must take action on it. We have two hands on, and we need to call this foul. It's very simple. There's nothing complex. Very foundational, very basic. Two hands on creates an advantage and a consequence. It's got nothing to do with the disparity in the size between these players. These are men. They're big, strong people. This creates an advantage and has a consequence. We need to address it using the principles we talked about earlier. So as we move towards screening, screening has become such a significant part of the game. Once again, when we have an obvious play, an illegal screen, or in fact, any screen, we must referee those situations, and we must see the whole play, and we must allow our rules principles to come into play. Screening is the only time in our rules that we actually use the word stationary. Yes, there is a situation where you can have a player with a legal screen when they're moving on a straight line path, but the mass majority, 98% of our screens in the game, are situations where by rule, the screener must be stationary. We have the situation of time and distance. If the player being screened is moving or is stationary. If the player is stationary, the screen can be, if in the visible field, anywhere short of contact. If the player being screened is moving, the distance that must be allowed is based on the speed of that player moving. It's a minimum of 1 step and never more than 2. When we're at that situation at 2, we're talking about players who are running full speed, an all-out sprint. A player who is moving at the pace of a dribbler and guarding that player is entitled to 1 step for that screen. But we need to referee all of these plays. We need to see the whole play before we make a decision. We've had a focus on screens for a while now because the pick and roll, the pick and pop has become such critical parts of the play. But I think we have to get back to basics. We have to get back to that structure, that foundation, and ask ourselves, are we being consistent? For you to have a successful game, you must be consistent from the beginning to the end of the game on all of the situations we're talking about today: block charge, hand checking, screening, and when we get to active shooting. Screening is very critical to be consistent. We also must increase our basketball knowledge. We must understand what the teams are trying to do, both on offense and on defense. Do we have the defensive team trying to move the screen? Do we have the offensive team trying to guide their defender into the screen? Understand those differences and what they mean. Recognize immediately, is the screen visual? Is it in the visual field of the player being screened? Or is it blind? Take a back screen. The play we're going to see is a screen that is blind to the player that is the defender, but it's not a back screen. Anytime we have a back screen and people do not know the player's there, remember by rule, we need to allow time and distance of that 1 step, but we also must determine if there's consequence. And when we deal with a pick and roll, is the defender trying to go under or over? But let's have a look at a very tough play, and we'll see that the official calls an illegal screen. We'll look at it a couple times.
throw. Can he quiet them? Yes, he can. Just like that. Sucks the air out of the balloon. Oh, that's an illegal screen. Gregory Vargas back in. Well, maybe.
Okay, Petri, if we can do it again, and we'll stop it before the contact occurs, kind of short of the contact.
Quiet them. Yes, he can. Just like that. Sucks the air out of the balloon.
Somewhere about there if we can. That's great. So you all witnessed that the referee called an illegal screen in this particular situation. Now, I can understand why that happened. We have a pretty solid piece of contact here, and we have the white player, number 23, the white uniform player, is knocked to the floor. But let's look at our principles. We have the blue offensive player is clearly going to set a screen. It's not in the visual field, so it tells us we must give time and distance. Let's look at that time and distance. How quickly is number 23 moving? Well, he's moving at the pace of the game, but he's not going particularly fast. And you can see here, he's clearly been given a full step before this screen. And so if we take it a little further, Petri, that's good there. We have a solid piece of contact, but the blue player has realistically stayed within their cylinder. The white player has no idea he's there, and there is a solid piece of contact here. Yet, what has the blue player done wrong? The blue player is stationary, relatively remains within his cylinder. The problem on this play is the white player's teammates. No one helps him, lets him know that the screen is there. And I agree with the referee that we need a call. We don't necessarily need a call on this play, but we need to see the whole play. And has the referee actually seen the whole play, or is the referee merely seen the reaction at the end of the play because of the solid piece of contact? Now, we brought this video not necessarily to get into the broad discussion about right or wrong on the play, but to help us understand these principles that we actually need to know the basics of the rule, the basics of the guidelines, and apply them to every situation. Taking ourselves back to our basic structural refereeing and applying it to games at all levels that we referee. Well, what would a discussion on the basics without a slide or two on contacts around protecting the shooter be? You know, our IoTs are so critical to everything we do. We talk about various IoTs all the time. And, you know, whether that is active mindset, referee the defense, distance and stationary, open angle, stay with the play, they're critical in all aspects, but never more so with a play involving the shooter. Whether you're refereeing a game and there's 12 people in the stands watching, or there's 18,000 people in the stands watching, I can guarantee you that the majority of those 12 or those 18,000 are watching the ball. As referees, we need to be better. We need to referee all aspects of the game, but clearly we have a referee with primary coverage watching that ball, and we apply our principles of protect the shooter. To be able to do that, we must use all of those IoTs, but we must focus on referee the defense. We use our 1, 2, 3 techniques, not for this webinar, but go back, have a look at those 1, 2, 3 techniques. Feet, body, hands, body, feet, up, down, 1, 2, 3 techniques. We need to stay with the play. We need to see the finish of the play. When we talk about processing the play, start, develop, finish, it's critical that we stay with the play and get to the finish. We need to understand, is it the offensive player that goes from one spot to another to where the defender is, or is it the defender who goes from A to B? Who creates the contact? Is it the defender or the shooter? And of course, on our 50-50 plays, our protocol tells us if we have 50-50 active shooting or not, we have active shooting. Let's have a look at video 7, a very simple video of a situation where we have a player in the act of shooting, and we see the referees do a nice job to apply our principles of protect the shooter.
Spins, turns, takes the foul, and 2 free throws coming for Yakov. Hatsura's frustrated now. He says, I think the issue is, did he leave his feet, even though he put his hands straight up? Does he actually come into Yakov? No, but he also kind of slides in front of him as well. I would give that a, yeah, I think that's a call. I think that's a good call from Zash.
So this time the announcers have got it right. We have a great example of a defender who goes A to B to the shooter. The referee recognizes that action, applies all of the things that we've been talking about in terms of protecting our shooter, refereeing the defense, staying with the play, sees the A to B contact, identifies the contact responsibilities with the defender, and calls the foul. Certainly a nice call, a relatively simple call, but we've done exactly what the rules of the game are defined for. Our referee picks up our defender, sees our defender go A to B. We have illegal contact with a consequence. We have a foul. Let me say that again. Illegal contact with a consequence equals foul. 1 + 1 = 2. So just to finish off our active shooting situation, we talk about consistency. And the big plays in the game that we need to be consistent are what we've talked about today. Block charge, hand checking, illegal screens, active shooting. You know what? At the end of the day, if you get the fouls right that involve shooters, you'll have a pretty successful game if you can get them right. Consistent from beginning to the end. Understand actions that must have a whistle. If we have a shooter that is illegally hit, a defender comes out of their cylinder and makes illegal contact with a shooter, particularly an airborne shooter, we have a foul. Our manuals tell us if you're not certain whether it's active shooting or not, that is, it's a 50-50 play, then it is active shooting. That's what our protocols tell us. And we indicate immediately if the ball doesn't go in that we have 2 shots. We use our signals in the book, and we use verbal support. As I wrap up this presentation, I'm going to encourage each and every one of you, when you go out in your next game, use that verbal support. And that verbal support is simply color, number, consequence. So strong whistle, we always stop the clock. And something we didn't talk about on our block charge plays. One of the ways to help ourselves with our block charge plays is we always have a stop clock signal. We don't go directly to a block signal or a team control signal or the charge signal. And we use that verbal support, color, number, consequence. Let's have a look at our last video.
In his 5 minutes on court, 8 points on perfect shooting. 19 the advantage. Only his 3rd appearance in qualifying. He only had 5 points. And 1 assist in 8.
So you can see on this play, the referees have actually determined that this is not active shooting. If we watch this on replay, we will see that the player has gone to gather the ball and started that motion to the basket, that normal shooting action. We have the gather. Oops, sorry. So we sort of lose the angle, but this player has got themselves into the act of shooting. And as a 50-50 play, we should have awarded free throws on this play. I think we get a good look at it here. There's our last dribble. And there's our illegal contact on the right. We can see we have a player that is in the act of shooting. An awkward play, but our protocols tell us that this is an active shooting foul. So we take ourselves back to those basics. That's sort of our presentation today. As I said, nothing over special, just very simple. And I think we can go some questions and answers.
Awesome. So thank you so much for that presentation. If you have any questions to any of our participants, if you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A box so we can answer them. First question is, how many times can you talk with the coach during a game as a referee?
So this is magic. There is no number. Certainly, as the question implies, we're not looking for a running dialogue. And there may be a point that we need to go to the coach and say, Coach, I'm sorry, I need to concentrate on refereeing. And your constant chatter is disturbing my concentration. Coach, I'll be happy to answer your question when we get a break in the play. There is no magic answer. If there's something legitimate and it helps keep the game under control, answer the coach's question. But certainly don't get yourself into a running dialogue with the coach. If it carries on too long, you have that ability, like we talked about at the beginning. Be in charge with integrity. Stop the conversation.
When it comes to making better calls, which is what this entire presentation was about, how important is it to have chemistry with the officials you're working with? And do you have any advice for working with a referee crew for the first time?
So teamwork is really what the question is about. And teamwork is so critical in the 3PO system. Years ago in the 2PO system, you could have two referees that maybe weren't exactly on the same page, but they could be consistent amongst themselves, and you could get through a game successfully. In a 3-person game, all three officials must have the same contact criteria, decision-making ability, must have a really strong fit, so it's critical. So if you have never worked with somebody before, hey, you need to sit down and invest the time. You need to learn from each other who those people are all about. Talk to them about their strengths and weaknesses, but do it from a place of vulnerability. Say, hey, I'm not very good with managing the shot clock or the game clock. This is an area that I'll probably need help as in a crew. Or say to them, this is what I'm working on in this game. I need to work on my use of verbal support. Help me out. Let me know if I'm not doing that well. Do things to encourage that bonding and that teamwork and pulling everybody together. You can't go out on the floor with people you've never met before and simply go out and referee. It doesn't work. We owe the game that commitment of being a single team.
Next question is from a participant. How to be more patient on the charge block foul? I have the tendency to go quick when it is a charge without the fist up. Do you have any tips?
Yeah. So imagine that you are in a building with 18,000 spectators. Or imagine that you're actually on stage in a Broadway play in New York, and we have a critical moment in the game. Let the people see the action. Let everybody absorb the action. And in fact, if you can get the situation where all those people in the stands turn and see that play, think about the fact that they're not as knowledgeable as you. They need time to process the play. So concentrate on stopping the clock. Breathe. Let those 18,000 people see the play, and they'll all go, ah, that's a charge. Now, when you go with a charge, you have them in your pocket and they're all accepting what you're doing. Recognize that you have that responsibility to have everybody understand what you did. So slow down, let everybody else catch up to you. When you react and you go too quick, people don't have time to absorb what happened. And that's where you'll get disagreement and conflict.
Next question is from Babacar. Whenever the offensive player has the ball and the defensive player puts two hands on his body, shall the referee say to the defender, hands off, before calling a foul?
Every time? No. Maybe the first time in the game it happens. But once you've indicated that, and remember, you're not whispering to that player, so only that player hears it. We're talking about what we did in communication, where we're guiding. When we say hands off, that's influencing everybody in the game. When you've told them to take the hands off the first time, two hands come on, you don't need to do it again. You have a foul the second time.
Next question is, what if I make a wrong call in the beginning of the game? Should I be consistent and make the same call the rest of the game?
No. I mean, I'll carry on from that, but I'd just like to say no. You know, in English, we have the statement that two wrongs don't make a right. And hey, if you make a wrong call, you're like the rest of us. My greatest skill as a referee was I could make mistakes faster than anybody else, but I made them quickly and corrected it for the balance of the game. We're all human. We're all going to make a mistake. If you do, be honest. It was a mistake. And then make the correct decision from that point on.
Next question is from Henry. Hand checking is tough to call in junior games. There is not a common understanding of what it actually is, and causes frustration among players and coaches. It's maybe not a question, more of a statement.
Sure, but I'll encourage Henry to become a facilitator. So don't think of yourself as a policeman or authoritative in these situations. Become a facilitator, helping the game to be better, helping those players to learn and understand, helping the coaches to learn and understand. And yeah, it'll take time and effort, but if you're working those junior games regularly and you have a group of officials working those games that apply the criteria consistently, it will improve. And by the end of your season, you should have a much better, much smoother running game.
Now, Mike, you officiated in Canada for 41 seasons and internationally as a FIBA referee from 1989 to 2008. So you have this extensive experience. How have you seen refereeing change or improve throughout your time being involved with basketball?
So I think when we first started to referee, we just went out and refereed. Today, even at the lower, younger levels, you have to work at the craft. You have to have the energy and the ability to work and the ability to learn. Perhaps the greatest skill we need as a referee is being a good learner. And all of this information is out there. Certainly when I started to referee, there was something called a rule book. And you know, it had probably 40% of the pages that today's rule book has, but all the resources that I talked about earlier, you know, whether it's the rule book, the interpretations, the IoT manuals, the terminology, the 3PO manuals, all of that is available on the FIBA IREF Library Academy, and it's wide open platform. It's available to everybody in the world. And so I can guarantee you that the top referees in the world work at their craft. And I would encourage everybody to do that. And it's so rewarding when you actually recognize yourself getting better by putting that time in.
Next question is, do both hands on the offense player require an immediate call, or do you watch for RSBQs that affect the offensive player before calling?
So again, the question is perfectly logical, But the fact is that the game of basketball is a dynamic 40 minutes where players are always moving. Generally, 2 hands on will result in a foul. But again, in that first instance where it's static position, you can preventative officiate. You also have to recognize, are you in a game where you've already had 48 fouls? Are you in a game that is out of control and you need to have it in control? Or are you in a situation where you can use preventative techniques deeper and later on in the game? But for the most part, when you see 2 hands on, your spidey sense goes up right away, and your immediately heightened reaction, and you're now ready to address that situation. So it's not necessarily looking for RSBQ, it's looking for what is the consequence that this contact occurs. But let's always encourage getting 2 hands off. And I'm talking about facing, right? I'm not talking about post play. We're not talking about post play here. We're talking about ball handlers, dribblers on the perimeter.
This is another specific question. Do we need to address big contacts between players always? Like in the video during a screen, big contact might occur and there is an expectation from the coaches and fans for those to be addressed, even when the no call might be best suited.
Correct. So let's try not to use the words always and never. Let's try and be a little bit tighter into the spectrum. But that being said, the mass majority of big contacts, the mass majority of bodies on the floor will require a whistle. On that particular play, the difference is we had a legal action that resulted in the player going to the floor. And this is where we use our abilities to communicate, and we can expect that later on, somebody will ask us why there wasn't a whistle on that play. And we need to have that composure to be able to accept it and address it. But realistically, that legal screen, no illegal action, is the only time we're going to have major collisions, bodies on the floor without a whistle.
Next question is, do you have any tips to build and maintain consistency? In my opinion, most of the contacts are different, and when one team fouls all the time, the other team does not. Coaches used to say, be consistent.
Yeah. So it's try and take everything back to basics, back to those principles. As I said, I like the FIBA rules because of those principles. So when we look at Article 33, which is our contact principles, and we look at things like cylinder, take every of those plays, and instead of looking them at why they're different, start to look at them as to why they're the same. So are they a player that's not vertical, a player that's come out of their cylinder, a player that's gone from A to B? Find the similarities in why they're illegal or legal, as opposed to the tiny little subtleties of left hand, right hand, big man, little man, whatever it is. Try and guide that, and I'll go a little bit further on it. So let's take a traveling situation. What do we need to have travel? We need to have control of the ball. That allows a pivot foot. We need to recognize the pivot foot. When the pivot foot is moved illegally, we have travel. Let's not get caught up in a whole bunch of other things. Over and back, we need to have team control in the front court, last to touch in the front court, first to touch in the back court. So it's all check boxes. And when you address contact, you can do the same thing with contact, address those check boxes.
Following on from the first call wrong / consistency question,
Yeah.
How can we bring that up with the rest of the game crew before it's too late? Or do we trust our judgment and not follow the wrong call and discuss at the first opportunity?
Discuss at the first opportunity. But when you have your pregame, I mean, something I did for a long time when I was working with officials, particularly that I didn't know well, have a real focus on getting the first call of the game right. I mean, you say it in the pregame, fellas, let's get the first call right. We do that, we establish a tone. You know what? It happens. And the first call can be the wrong call. But let's try and eliminate those occurrences and really think about getting that first call right.
How would you let the coaches and players be aware of the A/B fouls, that they're actually fouls when they are repeatedly happening in the game? How would you communicate with them at the beginning of the game, and how would it be different by the end of it if it's still happening?
So I think you use that same terminology. You say to the coach, coach 23 went A to B. He went from inside the no charge circle and jumped laterally towards the shooter. You actually use the real language and tell them what happened. But if it continues the entire game and you've explained the rationale as to why you're making the decision, you don't have to feel obligated to continue to explain it. If you've done it correctly, they may just be in a position that they just feel like disagreeing today. And maybe their cat died last night. And if they're having a bad day because their cat died, you can't do anything about that. You just do your job, let them know what the situation is, and carry on.
If the referee made an incorrect call and the head coach asked questions about the decision with complaints, what is the best option for the referee to talk to him?
So if that situation has occurred, we should be honest and not be shy of saying, Coach, I made a mistake. That wasn't a good decision. But always finish it with, it won't happen again. Or, Coach, I might have been wrong. I will do better. Some indication to acknowledge it, but you're not going to do that 11 times a game. That might be once a game, once every 3 games. But if something is blatantly, obviously wrong, admit it. I mean, what is the coach going to do? The only thing he can say to you is, well, you need to do better, or something along those lines. Now, remember, we place a very strong focus on the last 2 minutes of the game. And as the game proceeds, we need to continually get better and adjust. And some of the questions around, every contact is different. What I will accept is that every game is different. And so you need to understand what's going on in that game and make those small adjustments game to game.
Does anybody else have any questions that you want to add into the Q&A box? We have a few more minutes. I think we've answered quite a bit. So my last question for now, unless anybody has any others, you mentioned working on your craft as, a piece of advice that you would have for any referees on this webinar. What else do you think referees should take, from this webinar and implement as they, look to reach that next level in their careers?
Yeah. Ask yourself, is it you that are making things more complicated? Or is this actually fairly simple? And if we can focus on those principles and those basics, can we be more consistent? Or do we just get carried away by watching some videos and looking at a play and trying to break down every millimeter of the play to get to our answer? I think sometimes we think this is harder than it is, and we add complexities to it. And I mean, why not? We want to feel good about what we're doing. Hey, refereeing is very, very hard, but it may not be because of the plays. It may be because everything else that goes on around the game. So try and break the game down into its simple components, its simple parts, muscle memory, rote actions, do the same thing all the time. Just, you know what? You go to an airport and the janitor does a great job of cleaning the washroom. Hey, what could be better than a guy that does his job well? And it's like refereeing. Look after the basics. Look after what you can control, the simple things.
Well, thank you, Mike, for all of your insight today. And thank you to our participants for being a part of this Monday special webinar. The next Women in Officiating webinar will be on Thursday, March 23rd. So that's coming right up. And the next Monday special webinar will be on Monday, April 3rd. You have to register for each session separately, so there's no collective registration. Once again, thank you so much for being here with us today. Stay healthy and stay safe. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.